Okay, so for this spacecraft, we're going to go small. We'll call it the Oliver 1. All right, now we're going to start with the smallest probe core that is compact and gives us all of our guidance abilities. So we're going to zoom in and we're going to make a very small spacecraft. So the first thing I'm going to do is rigid attachment, like always. Then we're going to go for our communications array. We're going to have an antenna here. That doesn't need to be rigidly attached because it's not going to be under stress. Then we're going to go to put a, nope, we need to go even smaller. Small inline reaction wheel. This is going to give us control authority to pitch forward, backward, side to side, and so forth. Then we're going to put the smallest round battery on it. All the time using rigid attachment. You can see this gives us an electric charge of 200, which is a good buffer. These reaction wheels tend to draw a good amount of power. So now we've got the core of our satellite. We're going to go to structural and we're going to put a little adapter. This is very lightweight. It's 0.05 tons. And that's just to expand out to our fuel tank, which is going to be a very small one. Actually, we're going to go with this one. It's the smallest fuel tank of this size with liquid fuel and oxygen. I always have to double check. Yep, I did it. Okay. Now we're going to need power, so we're going to do some solar panels. I'm going to hit the X key. Now instead of left clicking on this to increase it, it would be good if you learn the shortcuts. It makes it easier, so I can put it here and I can hit X. And every time you hit X, it'll cycle through. I always kind of leave one hand on the keyboard over here anyway. So there we are. Now we're going to go to our action group. Click on number 1. Extend and retract. Extend and retract. Now we need to, let me remove this. We need a heat shield for our re-entry. I'm going to go with the same size heat shield as our expansion module there, and then we need a decoupler. Now we can put our fuel tank on. And I already set it to rigid attachment, so it should still be, yep, it's still on. Now we're going to go to our engine. Oh, nope, one more thing. In our coupling area, we're going to go for a very small engine plate. It's the smallest one out of these 5, each one getting progressively bigger. So see where that green ball is at the bottom there? We can adjust where that is. So if I put the engine on right here, and then I put a decoupler underneath it, not that one, the smaller one. It's just that's a lot of wasted space, and it actually does add mass, so we don't want to do that. So let's program our decoupler. First we turn on the rigid attachment. Now we're only going to use one motor, one rocket engine on this. So I'm going to keep that at single. But down here at the bottom, you can change where that is. So I right click on it, and then I'm going to hit the smallest one. And now we can go right there. So now it's nice and compact. So now that we've got that, let's put on our fairing. So now we're going to make sure that its clamshell deploy is on, and it's going to eject 2 sides, and let's go with maybe about 100, well, let's go about 130. It can be anywhere from 200 to 100. I generally go up from 100 a little bit every time I ever put on a fairing. Rigid attachment, auto strut, and then we can click build. We're going to make a very streamlined rocket. So you can see that our upper stage here fills most of the space in our fairing. And now we're going to come down here and we're going to look. When we click on this button, left click, we can see that our total mass so far is 1,860 tons. Let's see what happens when we take off the fairing. 1,400 tons, but even less. When we're using this module, we're not going to have this decoupler here. So this rocket engine is going to be pushing about 1.375 tons. A very light payload. So our objective here is to get into orbit by building this one of the smaller rockets that we can. So we're going to use this fuel tank. We can change the color if we want and make it all white. Now I'm going to use this motor, the Bobcat. And I'm going to rigid attachment to that too. Oops, it's already on. Alright, so now we check our staging. First, the rocket motor fires. Well, I think we're going to want to move the oh wait, no. We have to have the fairing first, because if we put this first, we're going to decouple and hit the fairing. So we need to get the fairing off before we can decouple and fire the final engine. And then one last thing, we're going to put on some fins for stabilizing our ascent up into the heavens. I'm going to press the X key until we get to 4. Now these particular fins I like to use because they can help change your direction. They're not static fit. They move like an aileron or an elevator or a vertical stabilizer on an airplane. And then, you know what, I'm not even going to put on the launch stability enhancer because this is a very small rocket, so it should balance just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and save since I altered the design, and let's launch it. We've got everything turned on so we can see our apoapsis or periapsis. We want to be able to see our electric charge here. You can see how it's already draining and we're not even doing anything. Alright, so there's two ways to get to orbit. There's the efficient way and there's the terribly inefficient way. We're going to do the terribly inefficient way first. And the idea behind showing you the difference is we're going to see how much fuel we have left when we get to orbit using two different methods of getting to orbit. And this is going to come in handy for when the developers of KSP release the following content, such as resource gathering on other planets and moons, and we want to have to move a lot of equipment out there, so we want to fly as efficiently as we can so we don't waste money. And the smaller the rocket you build, really the easier it is to fly. So here we are. I'm going to go ahead and launch. I'm going to throttle up. Now, since we're not moving too fast through this thicker atmosphere down at the bottom, I'm going to, when we get to about 300 meters a second, I'm going to throttle back so we don't waste too much fuel pushing against the atmosphere. We still want to try and do this efficiently, even though I'm showing you the inefficient way to do it. See, as we transition to the second section of atmosphere, we're going to stop seeing that atmospheric drag. So yeah, the drag disappeared because the atmosphere gets thinner and thinner, and as it gets thinner and thinner, there's less of it pushing against our rocket. So when we get to 80 kilometers, I'm going to cut off the engine. That's going to be the peak of our altitude when this gets to 80 kilometers. And engine cut off. Alright. So we're slowing down still because we're in the atmosphere. We have got no thrust on. But the atmosphere is so thin that it's really not slowing us down too much. So we're still going to fly all the way up to 80 kilometers. It's like when you throw a ball in the air and it's falling up, but it's still falling. The Earth's gravity is pulling on it, so as it goes upwards, it continues to slow down until it comes to a stop, and then it begins to accelerate back down towards the Earth. So look at all this speed we're bleeding off. We're going to bleed off all the speed and energy that we created going up and out of the atmosphere, which is a terrible waste of fuel. So I'm going to speed up time here a little bit so we can get out of the atmosphere and deploy our fairing. So fairing deploy, going to extend our antenna and our solar array, because now there's no more atmosphere messing with our rocket. It won't rip off the solar array. I'm going to switch the map screen. As we get close, we have to turn. Look at our grab ball. I'm going to use the D key and reorient us so that we're parallel with the Earth and with the ground and the sky. And the blue represents the sky, the brown represents the Earth. So if you get yourself balanced right there, right at the border, you're parallel. So we're going to turn on our engine. Now we got to get all that speed back. So we've got about 1,000 meters of delta V left. See, now we're starting to go down the side of the hill. So now I have to orient the rocket upwards a little bit to get this back up at ground level, and then we can pitch back down some. But we're going to have to waste some fuel pointing up. Now I'm going to jettison the first stage, light the second stage. Might have to point up a little bit more, because we don't want to fall too far down this hill, otherwise our orbit height won't be as high. So we have to get all the way up to 2,300 meters per second to be in orbit. So all that speed we had going straight up is gone. Now we have to do it all over again. So we're using double the fuel in essence, almost double the fuel. I'm going to pitch up a little bit more to bring our apoapsis up to us, because we're still going up the hill. Now I'm going to come back down. Now that we're right there, we're aligned with our apoapsis, we can fly more efficiently. You can see when our periapsis gets up to, so we've lost some altitude because we're flying down the hill a little bit. Now I'm going to hit our prograde, and I'm going to do engine cutoff. Now, so we're roughly 77 kilometers, 79 kilometers in altitude above the Earth. As long as we're above 70, we're good to go. We only have 156 meters a second of fuel left, which is just enough to deorbit us into the ocean. All right, now we're going to use the more efficient method of getting to orbit, and what that does is it allows us to conserve some of our velocity by transferring our velocity to horizontal ahead of time, and we'll see how much fuel we have left over when we get up to orbit. So I'm going to throttle up to about just over 3/4 and hit the space bar. Now we're going to start pitching over at about 50 meters a second. You just get out ahead of your prograde marker on the first 10%, and then once the prograde marker catches up, you hit the prograde button. And now let's lower our throttle a little bit so we're right in the sweet spot between 1 and 2 Gs. A little bit more. So we're a little bit ahead. We're 250 meters a second as we cross the second 10%. So we want to slow down our speed a little bit so that we catch up. We want to be at about 300 meters a second when we hit the third mark, 400 meters a second when we hit the fourth mark. So I'm going to give it a little bit more throttle so that we get up there to... So if you're flying right in between the first and second G marker, you're kind of accelerating at the same rate as you're pitching over. So you can see we actually have a good bit of horizontal speed at this point. And we're going to throttle down, continue to throttle down a little bit, because as we lose fuel, or as we burn up our fuel, we get lighter and lighter. So the same amount of thrust is going to accelerate us at a higher rate of acceleration, or higher g-force. And right in between 10 and 30%, you want to be roughly 800 meters a second. Usually closer to between 20 and 30 actually, and then as you get up here between 10 and 20 degrees, you'll be up in the 1,000 meters per second. And same thing, I'm going to cut off the engine when we get our apoapsis up to about 80 kilometers. You got to be able to do the math quickly in your head. So 38,000 meters is the same as 38 kilometers. Now we're at 39 kilometers, 40 kilometers, or 40,000 meters. So you got to math fast, Oliver. Okay, we're getting closer to our 80 kilometer mark. When we get to 80, I'm going to hit X. All right. So the wind is slowing us down, the atmosphere is slowing us down a little bit, but now we're way up in the sweet spot where the atmosphere is so thin it barely does anything to us. You can see it's slowing us down, but barely. We're still going to have an apoapsis of 80 kilometers when we get up there. So switching to map screen, we're going to pan around. I like the view to be about like this. And we're going to speed up time so we can jettison our fairing and initialize our solar panels and antenna. And spacebar. There they go. Now our solar arrays are extended. We're gathering solar power so we can charge back up our battery. We're still going up. So we're slowing down as we're going uphill. We have to get to the absolute height of 80 kilometers. But look at how much speed we have now. Instead of going straight up, when we're going straight up, we only have about 200 meters a second of speed, but we already have 1,800 meters a second of speed, which is very close to the speed we need to achieve orbit. We have to get up to about 2,300 meters per second. So we only have to accelerate about 500 meters per second to achieve orbit. So I'm going to get us closer, right about there. I'm going to turn on the engine, full power. You can see we don't have much fuel left. Boom, we're out of fuel already. The map screen, you have to be on map screen to jettison your stage. So now I'm going to spacebar, spacebar. Now we're accelerating. We might have to pitch up a little bit just like we did before so that our apoapsis doesn't keep falling behind us in this direction. There we go. And cut off. There we are. So we're close to 2,300 meters a second. We've got our periapsis is 78 kilometers. So we're out of the atmosphere. Our apoapsis is 80 kilometers. So both of them are out of the atmosphere. We've achieved a stable orbit. And look at that. Look how much fuel we have left. We have 811 meters a second of fuel left. And we're in a stable orbit. So this is much more efficient. So when you start building really big payloads, it's important to get to orbit more efficiently so that your rocket doesn't have to be as big. And the bigger your rocket in KSP, the harder it is to fly. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the KSP2 roadmap. What we see here is the initial release is going to be early access, which is just kind of a sandbox mode. And then you've got steps in which KSP2 is going, or the developers are going to release add-ons to the initial game. So you've got the science mode where you can gather science and do tech tree progression and get bigger and bigger rockets, and then colonies. And so once we get to the colony phase, we're going to be flying a lot bigger rockets. So it's going to be more difficult getting to orbit with bigger payloads, but we have to bring a lot bigger payloads out to these outer rim planets and moons so we can set up shop and then eventually get vehicle assembling buildings built in space for interstellar travel, where we're going to be going to different star systems and colonizing planets there. We're going to need machinery that transfers or that converts water to oxygen and hydrogen and carbon dioxide into methane and stuff like that, so that we can create rocket fuel and get back, ultimately making habitable planets. And then you've got exploration. They're going to reveal, and then you get into, when they release this, we're going to have resource gathering capabilities, so colonies are going to become very meaningful. and then ultimately multiplayer. And then in the multiplayer mode, we can, once this comes out, this is the biggest one in my opinion, because then at this point we can play together at the same time in the same server, and we can work together. You know, maybe you want to set up your colony on Mars and I'll start setting mine up on one of the moons of Jupiter, and then we can work together to achieve the same mission. That'll be ultimately the best part of KSP2 in my opinion. So all right, we're done with episode 1. Let's move on to episode 2. I'm going to try and make these shorter and shorter, like 10 minutes of video at a pop, and you don't have to watch them all in succession, Oliver. I'm just trying to get you trained up so that we can work together